Just when I thought I'd seen it all in terms of chess openings, tricks, and traps, then lo, there comes a brand new opening. At least new to myself. Ladies and gentlemen, chess is very dynamic. And I'm sure by the end of this video, you are going to agree with me that there's a lot more stuff that we need to learn about chess. So the tricks and traps that I'm about to show you today in the two knights defense precisely can be played from beginner level up to grandmaster level, whether in bullet, blitz, rapid matches, or even classical games. I'm sure you're going to like this video, which is why I encourage you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I mean, at least if you find this video interesting. So white begins with pawn to e4. Here goes our first trick. Then e5, knight f3, attacking our a5 pawn. Then we go knight c6. And then white plays bishop c4. This is the Italian game. Now right in this position, black can either play bishop c5 or knight to f6. In this video, we are focusing on knight to f6. We are not going to talk about bishop c5. And this is what I want you guys to be playing, knight to f6. This is called the two knights defense. This is what I want you guys to be playing from today onwards. Oh, this is very solid. You're going to love it. Watch up to the end. So knight to g5, which is the second top played move in the Lichess database, is what you're going to see most of your opponents playing, hoping to enter into the lines of the fried liver attack. As you can see, white is just simply attacking our weak f7 pawn with his bishop and the knight. And so here I recommend you go d5, and after they take, well, you don't play any of these highlighted moves. I know in my previous video on the two knights defense, I recommended the move knight to d4, which is an okay move, by the way. So if I do not recommend any of these highlighted moves, knight takes d5, knight d4, or the most popular continuation, knight to a5, what do I recommend? Because see that this pawn is attacking your knight on c6, I just recommend that you ignore this threat and play pawn to b5. Wow, this world is nice. You guys, I've been playing chess for nearly 20 years and I can't imagine that I completely gave this opening a blind eye. And just like I mentioned earlier on, this is also playable in classical and the position is almost equal according to Stockfish. From here we can expect to see bishop takes b5, which is the top played move, by the way, according to the Lichess database. Bishop f1 is the second most played move. D takes c6, the third played move. Bishop b3 and knight takes f7. This is what we're going to cover in this video, starting with bishop takes on b5 first. And oh, I should mention that all these highlighted moves in red are blunders, okay? Spoiler alert, the correct move here is bishop f1, which is very weird and very difficult for your opponents to see. Why? Because it looks weird to undevelop your piece. Like, imagine you just developed bishop to c4, again you go back. This is a Stockfish move. It's not a human move. So let's start with the mistakes first. Bishop takes b5. After this, I recommend you just play queen takes on d5, attacking the bishop and the pawn on g2. And here you may see white taking on c6. After which you just take the bishop, still attacking the pawn on g2. Black may castle short, and then you play bishop b7, intending to checkmate on g2. And here you will see white stopping this checkmate with pawn to f3, the top played move again. After which I recommend you go pawn to h6 first. I know there's quite a number of moves that you can play. Bishop c5 check, and here you see that most of the times we also castle long. We don't want to castle short. Anyways, let's continue. After pawn to h6, please note that if the knight goes to e4, we'll be glad to take it and also take the pawn, the free pawn. So you see white playing knight to h3, and yes, even though you can go bishop c5, which is also an okay move, this is why you can surprise your opponent by start advancing right away on the king side. This is the beauty of this opening and suitable for aggressive players, okay? If you like playing normal games, or if you are not a risk taker, then this defense is not for you. So we are going to destroy our king side as quickly as possible because we also have an option of castling long. So pawn to g5, why not? The plan is just to go pawn to g4 and destroy white's king side. And this is what we do almost in every opening if we see that our opponent has already castled short. So please note that if pawn to d4 by white, will gladly castle long and pin that pawn to the queen. So knight f2 is what you are going to see most of your opponents playing. You go pawn to g4 anyways. And here is the first trick, by the way. If pawn takes pawn, we'll be glad to checkmate white on g2. That's checkmate. So you won't see white blundering like that, which is why they like playing queen e2 in this position, simply attacking the pawn on e5. Well, here you just continue by castling long, and if they take our pawn with their knight, we take back with our knight, they'll take with their pawn, and again remember that we are still eyeing the g2 pawn, so white won't have time to recapture our pawn on e5. h5 is what I recommend, just simply going for a kingside attack. We just want to open up the h file for our h rook. So black will play something like g5. They don't want to open up this file. So bishop c5 check. We have plenty of things to do. And then we go rook d4. The plans are very simple. We just want to play along this diagonal. By the way, the queen can't still take this pawn here because we have a mate on g2. So they may play something like pawn to h3, just creating a breathing room for the king. Here you just simply go rook e4, if queen f3, rook f4, queen e2, you simply take on g2. That's check, by the way, supported by the light squared bishop. If queen takes, we take the rook on f1 because the queen cannot take our rook. The queen is pinned to the king by our bishop. So king h2, and then we take the queen, we start taking the other pieces. So this is one possibility of how the game can go. Let's look at another possibility, another line. Now you guys see, it only takes 4 to 5 seconds to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. That's how you encourage me to keep on making more wonderful content. And by hitting the like button, you are simply saying, thank you, Kaspa. Please, let's grow this community together and continue encouraging one another. For more serious content, you can simply join membership by visiting my Patreon page. The link is in the description down below. And there you also find the link for my website where you can purchase all my courses at very affordable prices. And I hope that sounds good. Alright, so back to this position. We just played queen d5, attacking the g2 pawn and the bishop. So white takes on c6, then we take back the bishop, still eyeing the weak g2 pawn. And then white rushes to castle. Again, what did I say when you see your opponent's castling short very early? You start thinking of the kingside pawn storm, starting with pawn to h6, g5, g4, etc. So bishop b7 is what I recommended, intending to checkmate on g2. And so we just looked at what happens after pawn to f3. But in this position, white can also play knight to f3, simply stopping that checkmate idea. And wait a second. Even though you need to be aggressive in such openings, you still need to be very careful and be very careful with your moves. For example, after white's previous move, knight to f3, pawn to e4 looks attractive, okay? But the problem with e4 is that it allows knight to e5. Let me show you. Let's say we go pawn to e4. They'll just play knight e5, attacking our queen. And let's say we play queen d5. They'll play d4. And if we take with n%, renewing the threat of taking on g2, they'll simply go back, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about that. I mean, even if you take, they have these threats, they can just neutralize your attack. They can safely develop their queen's knight. Of course, after taking your queen, I mean, there's just so much that white can do in this position. So just because you need to be aggressive doesn't mean you need to stop calculating the correct moves. So don't go pawn to e4 here. That's one move to remember. Just simply castle long to avoid anything. Okay, now white plays pawn to d3. Then here there's quite a lot of moves that you can play. Now pawn to e4 here is even a possibility because your king is safe. Your king is no longer on the center. But here I even like this move, pawn to g5. This is one of the key moves in this opening. When the dust settles, just simply open up the g file for your king's rook, okay? The plan is very simple. We just want to go pawn to g4. By the way, this is a poisoned pawn. White cannot take this pawn in almost all the variations because of this queen bishop battery that we have along this diagonal. We are going to mate white on g2, so white has to be very careful. So our plan is simply to go pawn to g4, harassing this white knight. E.g., if white takes with the bishop, we simply go rook g1. For example, if white plays knight bd2, we just simply take the free bishop. It is free because if knight takes on g5, again, we simply mate on g2. So this is how tricky this opening is. And because of this threat of taking the bishop, you won't see white playing knight bd2. They'll play something like bishop takes on f6, which happens to be the top played move. And after this, you can now simply take the bishop on c6, and still we have a threat, by the way, of taking on g2. For example, knight bd2, then we play bishop b4, going for this knight, because what we want to do is taking this knight, and after queen takes, we take the other knight with our queen. So c3 is forced, and here we just simply take the pawn on d3. Because if c takes b4, we simply take the knight. Because if knight takes on d2, for example, there's a mate in 4 after. Rook takes on g2, and that's check. If king h1, we go rook g1, double check. Then king takes g1 is the only move, after which we play queen g5 check, queen g4, then mate. So those are the tactics that are hidden behind this move, rook takes on d2, which is why you will see white taking with a queen, but still we can recapture with our queen on f3, and now checkmate is unavoidable. I mean, there's nothing, absolutely nothing that white can do to stop the checkmate. If pawn to g3, we have the bishop on b7 here, we'll just simply mate on g2 once again. So let's look at another possibility here. Okay, back to this position here. We are still looking at the bishop takes on c6 line. And after we recapture, still eyeing the weak g2 pawn, white castles short. And this is why I said play bishop b7, intending to checkmate on g2 once again. So we just looked at what happens after pawn to f3, or if white plays knight to f3. But what if they play the most played move according to the master's database, queen to f3? You can now safely play pawn to e4. Why? Because you are putting a direct threat on the enemy's queen. And if they play rook e1, now wait a second, castling long is the top played move according to the Leach's database, and actually it is a very terrible blunder at the same time. I mean, you can even see for yourself here, if you castle long, this pawn on f7 is left alone. So that's why I said, just because you are playing an aggressive opening or an aggressive defense, it doesn't mean you need to stop thinking. Anyways, you don't have to castle long here. Just simply go bishop e7, because you are still holding on to your f7 pawn. So now white plays something like queen c6, hoping for a queen exchange. Well, here I suggest that you do nothing about this, and instead just try to get rid of your enemy's piece from your territory, which is the knight. I mean, if you castle short again, you will only throw away your advantage to white. For example, let's say you castle short in this position. It looks like everything is normal, but white has this dangerous continuation. Queen takes, bishop takes, d3. Because your e4 pawn is pinned to the bishop, which is undefended, as you can see, you start making desperado moves such as bishop b4, then c3. You go bishop d6. Knight takes, pawn takes, and there's nothing that you can do about it. White will play pawn to f3, fix his pawn structure. He will play knight bd2 with the ideas of putting it on c4. Position here is plus 1.7 in favor of white. So that's why you need to be very careful even when you are playing these aggressive openings and defenses. So you don't have to castle short in this position. Just simply go pawn to h6. Asking white where he will take his knight. If they take your queen on c6, take back with your bishop. And please note that the knight cannot take the pawn on e4 because we have two attackers. Knight back to f3 is also not a move, so you will see them playing knight h3. After which you simply castle long. Knight c3 is played, then you go rook h e8. Just playing normal chess here and ensuring that you still have an advantage. Knight f4. Bishop c5. I mean, you need to play in a way of putting your pieces on active squares. This is a typical idea in the two knights defense. We usually accept to be down a pawn for an active play. Even in the normal two knights defense, by the way. Look at how active your pieces are as compared to your opponent's pieces. In the near future, we still have plans to go g5, our main plan, and continue attacking on the king side. Not to mention that we have this bishop pair advantage and we should be good to go from here. Alright, so this was just about everything to do with bishop takes on b5. Now, instead of bishop takes b5, you may see white taking on c6 with his d pawn. What do you do about this move? Well, let's see. So after d takes c6, what I recommend is just simply taking back on c4. And after queen e2 by white, by the way, this is the top played move. White is simply attacking two of our undefended pawns. So you go queen d5, defending everything and also posing a threat of capturing on g2 and on c6. So white will be forced to play e.g. knight c3, attacking your queen and also renewing the possibility of capturing on e5 once your queen goes away. So here you just simply take on g2 because now you are also attacking the rook on h1. Queen takes e5 check, you go bishop e7. There's nothing that white can do. You're still attacking the rook on h1. They'll play rook f1 and here you can now safely castle short. Please note that if queen takes on e7, you have this pin right here because your knight is defending your rook. And so white's queen is pinned to the king. You should be able to win this game from here. Anyways, so you won't see white taking on e7. They play something like queen g3 going for a queen exchange. Nah, you just take the pawn on c6. If they play d3, take the pawn, and after pawn takes, you go rook e8, planning to do a simple discovery. If bishop e3 blocking the upcoming check, they want to castle long in order to put their king to safety. But hey, we have this sneaky move which most of your opponents will not see, bishop a3. The idea is that if b takes on a3, we can simply take the knight on c3. And so you are still going to see most of your amateur opponents castling long because now they think they are attacking your bishop on a3, but you have this move, queen takes on c3 and does check. This pawn cannot take your queen because it is pinned to the king, okay? So it cannot take your queen. They will go king b1, the only move, after which you mate on b2. That's how fast the game can end. Anyways, let's go back and see other lines. So back to this position, again, instead of b takes b5, white takes on c6 with his d pawn, and then we play b takes c4. And now instead of queen e2 right in this position, white can also rush to castle short. This is a very common move, by the way. You will see it from time to time. Here you just play normal chess, beginning with pawn to h6. Because it's always good to chase your opponent's pieces away from your territory. They'll play knight f3, you go e4. If rook e1, pinning your pawn to the king, well, this is not even a pin that much. You just go bishop e6. And now white's knight on f3 is under attack. And please note that white's knight cannot go to d4, we'll simply take with our queen. They can't go to h4, we'll simply play pawn to g5. And the knight will be trapped. So the only move they have is knight e5. At least they have one more safe square to go to, which is knight d7. And that's why you need to play bishop d6. They'll play a desperado move, for example d4, trying to open up some lines. And only then you will see them playing knight to d7. The idea is that at least on this square their knight is safe. If you take the knight, they'll simply recapture with a pawn. But here we have a more aggressive move, bishop takes on h7, which is very much hidden. Because now if king takes, we give white a check on g4 with our knight, and if king g3, because of this pawn on e4 which we played earlier on, we are free to continue matching. There's a mate coming. If we go h4 check and maybe f6 g5, yeah, something like that. So rook takes on e4 is what you see them playing. Anyways, you continue pushing your h5 pawn to h4. That's check. And please note that if the king goes to f3, we have knight h2 check. So they'll have to play something like king f4. I mean, you can already see all these ideas. We are attacking the queen on d1, queen e1, h3, queen takes e6 check, queen e7. We don't mind trading off our queens because we have a more active position. And right here, we should be winning. We have a passed pawn here and also a passed pawn right here. Anyways, let's look at another line. Okay, back to this position. We just played pawn to b5, and then instead of bishop takes b5, white takes on c6 with his d pawn. Then we go b takes c4 once again. Now we just looked at what can happen if white plays queen e2 and castle short. But they may also play a desperado move, knight to c3. Not really a desperado move, but a developing move. Here you just continue normally, pawn to h6, knight to f3, bishop d6, castle short, castle short. One thing that you need to understand about the two knights defense is that we do not mind playing this game while we are a pawn down, because in most of these positions, it is black who is advantaged and favored by stockfish. So whatever you may play, as long as you just keep on putting your pieces on active squares, stockfish will like your positions. Anyways, instead of knight to c3 here, you may see white playing pawn to d3. Again, this is not a threat. You just continue c takes d3. If queen takes, you take the queen. I mean, if there is anyone who doesn't want to exchange queens, it should be white. And here you can see with bishop to s6, we are simply targeting this undefended pawn. Castle shot by white, there's nothing much they can do to protect this pawn. And now, even though we can take this pawn, we just go on with a different plan. Knight d5, rook d1, knight b4, knight c3. Because we were intending to go on c2, winning the free rook on a1. So after knight c2, anyways, rook b1, rook d8. There's just nothing that white can do to hold on to his pawn. Again, bishop e7 attacking the hanging knight on g5. And let's say they play knight f3. We go pawn to f6. I mean, material is equal in this position, even though we were down a pawn in the opening stage. And once again, stockfish thinks white is way much better in this position. We don't even want to castle short. We just simply play king f7 and connect our rooks. I think that's about most of the important stuff that you needed to know in the d takes c6 line. Let's move forward. And now let's look at the bishop b3 line, which goes after e4, e5, knight f3 by white, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian game, and then you go knight f6, the two knights defense. So knight g5, white is intending to go into the lines of the fried liver attack. You go pawn to d5, e takes d5, and now, instead of knight d4 or the normal knight a5, you just simply play pawn to b5. This time, white has learned his lessons, so he doesn't want to take on b5 and he doesn't want to take on c6. So you see him playing bishop b3. Well, even though you can take on d5, which is not the best move by the way, just become more creative. Go knight d4, at least you're attacking the light squared bishop here. c3, you get rid of the light squared bishop. If queen takes on b3, you go queen takes d5. I mean, as black, you don't mind exchanging queens in the opening, since by nature you have limited options, okay? White always has that advantage in the opening stage since he is the one deciding how the game should go. I mean, in most cases. So queen takes d5, here you simply take back with your knight, castle shot by white, you play pawn to f6. Again, always remember to get rid of your enemy's pieces away from your territory. They'll play knight f3 and c5. I mean, you know that white wants to play d4, so just go c5, because if d4 comes, you take that pawn, and if rook e1 check, again, it's not just about castling short, you guys. There are no queens on the board, so you are very safe to play king f7. I mean, one of the endgame principles say your king must become an attacking piece in the endgame. You should start using it, and this is what we are doing. We are going towards the end game, so this is very fine for us. You can simply see how we are connecting our pawns on the queen side. White's pawn on d4 is an isolated pawn. We still have plans to go bishop g4 and bishop d6. So the whole secret in the two knights defense, whether you're playing a normal variation or any other, is just to put your pieces on the most active squares. Look at white's sleeping pieces. And that's just how simple it is to play this line, you guys. So that was in the bishop b3 line, instead of taking on b5 or c6. But instead of bishop b3, you may also see some players taking on f7. I mean, let's look at this line also. So, well, knight takes on f7. See, even though this move looks tricky, it's actually the worst move of all times. Because here we can just simply take the knight, and after d takes c6, an open check, it will be very sad for white because we can simply take the bishop, and now we are up a full piece. So here we are just simply up a bishop. So that's why knight takes f7 is a very terrible blunder, and we can't even analyze it. Now, having gone through all the bad moves, what is white's correct response after pawn to b5 on move number 5? Well, in all honesty, the best white can do is to go back to f1, just like I mentioned in the introduction of this video. They have to accept to undevelop their piece. Now, wait a second. This is very tricky and you should be very careful. It looks like now we can simply take back this pawn on d5, but these are positional mistakes, both knight takes d5 and queen takes d5. Because if you take with the queen, white can play knight to c3, buying time on your poorly developed queen. And equally, believe it or not, if knight takes d5, white can simply play bishop takes on b5 this time, which comes with tempo, and you will have to stop what you're doing to start defending your knight on c6. So because of this, just simply go knight d4. Or at least knight d4 temporarily holds on to the b5 pawn. And here the top played move by far is pawn to c3. After which I recommend you go knight takes on d5, and if they play c takes d4, you take the other knight which is on g5, and trust me, with this line you have to accept losing your castling rights, but it's still okay, and I like this line out of all the lines that I've showed you so far. They'll take on b5 with check, you simply play king d8, your king is absolutely safe on this square, cause remember, in the two knights defense, it's all about piece activity, okay? It's all about piece activity. It's nothing to do with material. Again, we are targeting the g2 pawn here. So white to castle shot, and then you play bishop b7. Look, your bishop is indirectly eyeing the g2 pawn together with your queen. And so there are some mating ideas on g2 here if white is not careful. For example, if they play pawn to d3, this is a terrible blunder because it leads to checkmate in 4. Watch. Here you simply play knight to f4, and there's absolutely nothing that white can do about this. They can't stop us from taking on g2 with our queen, or maybe they can play pawn to g3. Yep, but there's knight h3, which is checkmate. The king can't go to h1 or g2 because of this light squared bishop which is covering all this diagonal. So going back, after bishop b7, instead of pawn to d3, a terrible blunder, you may see white playing d takes c5. Again, this is a blunder because of knight to f4 once again. And there's absolutely nothing that white can do apart from just playing g3, allowing us to mate on h3 once again. So this is how deadly things can be if white is not careful. So bishop b7 once again is what I recommend. And here the move that you're going to see by white is queen f3, which is a correct move, by the way. After this move, well, I just recommend that you defend your bishop on b7 with your rook, because the idea is to go knight f4 once again. If they play pawn to d3, wait a second. Knight to f4 in this position does not work, because if you play knight to f4, white can now play bishop c6 and there is no checkmate coming. You are going to have a worse position. This knight is going to be pinned by the bishop to your queen, and so here you just simply play queen g6, and now as you can see by the arrows, bishop c6 is no longer an option for white. For example, if they play d takes e5, now you can simply play knight f4. Ladies and gentlemen, not only are we threatening to take on g2, but we are also attacking the queen on f3. If queen takes the knight, then there is a mate on g2 coming. If the bishop takes our knight, we simply take the queen on f3 and white cannot recapture because of the pin. So king g3 is what you see most of your opponents playing, but we have knight e2 check, which also wins the queen on g3. And I'm sure by this time you can already see how deadly this opening is. So after queen f3, just simply go rook b8, indirectly defending your bishop on b7 in case of knight to f4. So again, we see white playing d3. The bishop is attacking our queen. We simply go queen g6, stopping this idea, the bishop c6 idea. Now in this position, instead of d takes e5, you may see white playing the immediate queen g3. What should you do in this position? Well, here you just humble yourself, take the pawn on d4, and now we have equal number of pawns if you count properly with a promising position. It doesn't matter if white takes your queen. I mean, this will just help us open the h file for our king's rook. And here, Stockfish is favoring black in this position. e.g. knight d2, knight f4, targeting the weak g2 pawn, and if pawn to f3, we go knight e2 check. Black has to play king h1. If they go king f2, we play knight takes on c1, rook a takes c1, bishop c8, attacking the light squared bishop. If bishop c4, we take the b2 pawn with our rook, threatening to take the knight next, so rook fd1 may be played. We play bishop b4. The knight is pinned to the king by our rook, and if rook b1, well, we simply take the knight and we are up a full piece. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the game for the weak. You don't see most of your games going like this. Now you guys see, it only takes 4 to 5 seconds to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. That's how you encourage me to keep on making more wonderful content. And by hitting the like button, you are simply saying thank you, Kaspa. Please, let's grow this community together and continue encouraging one another. For more serious content, you can simply join membership by visiting my Patreon page. The link is in the description down below, and there you will also find the link for my website where you can purchase all my courses at very affordable prices, and I hope that sounds good. Alright, thank you for watching this video, guys. Until next time, bye bye.